Hey everyone, it's been too long, but I'm back. This is Dan Willis. This is a video that I have told a few of you is coming. Some people have reached out to me recently about the latest goings on, whether it's politically or economically. Clearly, there's been some huge development since the last time I did a video. So I felt like it was time to put a lot of this together. You'll notice a different format. So I did spend some precious hours putting together a little slide deck to help us follow along. And I really want to highlight a few things around the meat and potatoes of this video is going to be something that I think is unfolding now and is not getting a ton of attention. And when it is, that attention is, from a media perspective, is heavily slanted and I think geared more towards influencing opinion than it is really informing readers about what's going on, or listeners or watchers, or whatever the case is. But with that said, we're going to just I wanted to do a quick transparency check for 2020 so far. Let's just kind of see what things I got right, what things I got wrong. Firstly, the election. Now, I don't really care who voted for whom or which candidate. But what I said a few months ago about there being a high likelihood that we were going to get a kinetic election that would ultimately be contested, here we are. We got it. It's surreal to watch. It is very surreal to watch happen. I put up a post on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. It's like, not hard to call, but really hard to still watch and live with. So that's one item that I think we were able to square the circle around pretty quickly, to say, hey, this is going to be one hell of a political fight that we encounter this election. One thing that I think I got pretty wrong was my take on markets, and specifically the equity market. Equities have shown some volatility. The VIX has been averaging somewhere in the mid to upper 20s, I think, which is, that's double the implied volatility on the S&P 500 than we've seen in the last couple of years. I think we were seeing volatility realized, about 10-12% on a bad month or a bad stretch a year or two ago. Now we're seeing it 20 or 25%, but stocks have shrugged off all of the bad real economic developments, right? So we had various levels of lockdown in the United States, depending on what state you lived in. We're not going to get into the details or I'm not going to do my take on lockdowns today, but what that effectively produced was pretty weak economies, especially within the entertainment industry, the leisure industry, restaurants, just where we like to spend a lot of those discretionary dollars. Those places were decimated. I've seen estimates ranging anywhere between 50 to 70% of small businesses under 40 or 50 employees aren't coming back, that have closed. I've talked to several of you that have either been impacted yourself or know someone close to you in your circle that has basically gone out of business or on the verge of going out of business. So I understand that times are incredibly difficult, whatever position you find yourself in, whether you've suffered from the pandemic itself, from a virus or a disease standpoint, or a close loved one has. That has been incredibly challenging, I know, across the spectrum. Whether you've been impacted economically, you've lost your job, you've lost your business. It's been really tough out there this year. I wish I could say that I've got super positive. We're about to turn the corner any day now. I don't think that. We could see. We could continue to see some bounces off the lows we experienced in the first half of the year once things shut down. But I don't have a very rosy outlook for the next year as we wait for Congress to start spending. So I've gotten markets kind of wrong. Not bonds, but definitely equities. Something I think I got right, was calling COVID, a serious threat. Now, there's a lot to discuss in regards to COVID-19, and that we will save for another video. There's been a lot of developments both on a therapeutic and prophylactic front in terms of what works and what doesn't, that hasn't really had the light shed on it at all, which I find curious. There have been disparities between countries that lock down heavily and they're starting to see a second wave, but then you have countries like Japan that you would expect to see a virus like this just decimate them, especially given they have the highest per capita population of elderly folks on the planet. But their deaths per million are a small fraction of what you're seeing in Western Europe and what you're seeing here in the United States, which, my take is this has been a complete failure and betrayal from a policy and agency level here in the United States and elsewhere, but specifically here on most levels. I mean, if not all levels. It's been I say remarkable to watch, maybe too much. It's been pretty depressing. It's been tough to kind of go through this. So before we get into the main part of the pitch tonight, the show, whatever you want to call it, I just want to say a quick piece about, I'm going to tell you some things that may scare you, although I'm not sharing this information to strike fear. I think fear is your enemy, and when it comes to action, and action needs to be on the forefront of your mind. So when I say action, I mean things like taking care of yourself first and foremost. I stepped away from most social media and doing any videos for 2 or 3 months. I had to get my diet straightened out. I had to get back into a good workout groove because I spent too much time putting my health off this year because we moved and we had all of these homestead projects going on. And that was really, I wanted to get a lot of that stuff done and get some experience under our belt before I looked to other things. But by the time the summer was over, I was so worn down and exhausted from a bad diet and not really taking care of my body that I had to focus on that. And that's the first thing that we can all agree that you can start right this moment making decisions and taking actions to improve your health personally at the individual level. I'm a big fan of assuming as much responsibility for yourself as you can possibly handle and always looking for ways to grow that capacity. So being healthy and being prepared to deal with some crap from a physical standpoint is a huge leg up. The secondly is, what do I start thinking about in terms of, we'll save that. That's the big thing. Focus on your health, because I think you can really the data are starting to show that you can take a lot of steps on your own before we get a solid vaccine or before we get something that seems to more easily nip this thing in the bud. Don't just sit on your hands and wait, because maybe what you're waiting for doesn't come. And with that said, let's move into our deck tonight. You'll notice this is new. You'll have to bear with me while I get this going. Hopefully I'll get some stuff done in post and it won't be too awful. But I've titled this talk Cigarettes and Gin: Surviving the Great Reset. So surprise, surprise, that's the conversation we're having tonight, is we're going to talk about the Great Reset. Several of you have reached out to me about what's going on, expressing almost a sense of just like demoralization, but with an antenna out saying, hey, something is afoot. I don't know what, and I don't know the details of everything, but I think I've got a pretty good handle on what we might be looking at here. And the title Cigarettes and Gin comes from two themes that I really kind of latched on in George Orwell's novel 1984. And the first theme is cigarettes are smoked heavily throughout that book, and they're all Victory cigarettes. They all come from the organization the state runs to produce cigarettes for the masses. And I used to smoke cigarettes. And one of the reasons, I remember being a kid and always thinking, watching old war movies and being like, oh, wouldn't it be so nice to not have to worry about taking care of yourself? You could just smoke cigarettes and drink because you're probably going to get shot, in the war. And there's this great excerpt from this book. The narrators, oh, well, we don't want to do that. We're just going to keep the color scheme and not show that message again. Anyway, the narrator goes, and this is at the end of the book, right before Winston, the story's protagonist, confesses his love for Big Brother. There was an announcement that the war was won again, and he's sitting in a cafe, and the narrator comes in. The voice from the telescreen was still pouring forth its tale of prisoners and booty and slaughter, but the shouting outside had died down a little. The waiters were turning back to their work. One of them approached with the gin bottle. Winston, sitting in a blissful dream, paid no attention as his glass was filled up. I've definitely filled up my glass this year, more than once. And I'm sure I am not alone in that. That was one of the big things I had to cut out of my diet. But I think this is really, I don't know, I don't want to use, this is really indicative of kind of where we are in the United States. And it's crazy to see it because you read about like the beginning of the USSR when Stalin rose to power. Drinking vodka became a national pastime for Russians. And it got so bad as the 20th century unfolded that Mikhail Gorbachev ended up having to push pretty heavy prohibition legislation in Russia just because people were just drunk all the time. And in the 19th century, almost everywhere, everyone was almost always drunk. That's why you probably saw lots of terrible health outcomes during that century especially. But we often look for things to numb us when the world that we thought we understood starts to show us that maybe we didn't understand it. And I want to highlight some things that might be breaking some people's mental models on how they view the world. Part of it is we're being gaslit like crazy. And if you're unfamiliar with what gaslighting is, it's basically an authority, whether it be a media authority or a politician, telling you something that is totally false to make you think you're crazy. Now, I don't know that that's the actual aim here, but maybe it's narrative creation. But in the New York Times on November 19th, that was last week, they ran at the bottom of one of their summary, they have a summary piece where they cover like 10 or 12 different topics and have 4 or 5 paragraphs per topic. You saw this story with the title, The Baseless Great Reset Conspiracy Theory Rises Again. And so, yes, people have begun talking more about the Great Reset. It is interesting here that they call it a baseless conspiracy theory. That I do not believe they have any evidence for. Here's the opening of the article. A baseless conspiracy theory about the coronavirus has found new life as cases surge once again. First piece is it's not really about the coronavirus. It's about what the coronavirus is being used as an excuse for. There's a lot of validity to that, as we will see. On Monday morning, the phrase "the Great Reset" trended with nearly 80,000 tweets and with most of the posts coming from familiar far-right internet personalities. The conspiracy alleges that a cabal of elites has long planned for the pandemic so that they could use it to impose their global economic control on the masses. In some versions of the unfounded rumor, it is only President Trump who is thwarting this plan to keep the scheme at bay. So just a couple of things on the structure and the framing of the article. The first 4 words have a lot of emotional value in them, depending on some of your ideas about the truthfulness of maybe the media at large, governments, business leaders, so on and so forth. But the language here is very charged, and they're shaping what you should think about the content of what they're the following content. Immediately, you're saying a baseless conspiracy theory. And another thing that's interesting here is this in the second paragraph, or really the first full paragraph, they associate this theory with far-right internet personalities. So there's two emotional kind of shots, I think, meant immediately to spike your distaste for maybe some folks that hold far-right conspiracy theories, of which there's no shortage. And the press sure likes to talk about them. But I found the framing here and that they're using kind of, trigger words or whatever interesting, because it's clearly they're looking for an emotional pull. And then they mentioned Trump later. So there's your third, like, if you're predisposed to think Trump is the worst person ever, or the worst president ever, obviously you're going to have quite the emotional response to this first chunk. So moving on, the narrative first took root in late May when Prince Charles and Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, announced plans to convene world leaders and discuss climate change and how to rebuild an economy damaged by the pandemic. The meeting was branded as a, quote, great reset, and the false rumors about the tight-knit group of elites manipulating the global economy took off. So, false rumors about the tight-knit group. I don't know what specific rumors they're talking about here. If they're trying to associate it with the idea that the pandemic was planned by these folks, yeah, that's probably the likelihood of that being true is extremely low, exceedingly low. But the likelihood of the ruling class, I will call them what I believe they are, the likelihood of the ruling class attempting to shape society for whatever reason under the because of a pandemic is here. I mean, let no crisis go to waste, right? This is a huge opportunity if you're politically ambitious in terms of the pandemic. Let's continue. Then over the weekend and into Monday morning, a video of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada speaking from a United Nations meeting in September gained millions of views online. In the video, Mr. Trudeau referred to a, quote, great reset, and also happened to utter the words "Build Back Better," which conspiracists saw as a tie-in to President-elect Joseph Biden, who had used the phrase as a campaign slogan, which is kind of interesting. It does matter when folks in power use similar language. They are often trying to express the same idea. And importantly, so there's a lot of prominent leaders talking about a great reset in these two paragraphs. So they get your emotions, jacked up with the opening and how they associate this conspiracy theory. And then you might not pay attention, or you might miss the fact that they're also, then they give you evidence of no, people are talking about a great reset, and these people are leaders, political leaders, business leaders. That's interesting. Really poor, if your goal is to deliver unbiased information to your readership, this is an awful, awful way of doing it. Soon, far-right internet commentators with records of spreading misinformation posted about the conspiracy, collecting tens of thousands of likes and shares on Facebook and Twitter. The posters included Paul Joseph Watson, a former contributor to InfoWars, and Steven Crowder, who has falsely asserted that coronavirus death tolls are inflated. So again, another appeal to, another association with very charismatic, very polarizing individuals, both with Steven Crowder, who's a conservative, kind of like he's almost like a full-on just young Republican commentator, and Paul Joseph Watson, which, if you're unfamiliar, InfoWars is the outlet run by Alex Jones. And we all know how polarizing a figure Alex Jones is. Some people, almost nobody has a neutral opinion on Alex Jones. You either love him or hate him. So here's the last bit of the piece, and we'll close it. Soon, far-right internet commentators with records of spreading misinformation. Oh, did we read that? Oh yeah, we didn't read this. They got a bunch of likes and shares on Facebook and Twitter. The posters included Paul Joseph Watson. No, we did read that. Joan Donovan, the research director at Harvard University's Shorenstein Center, said it was maddening to see the same networks of influencers traffic and recycled conspiracies and get in the way of delivering accurate information to the public. What is true is that COVID is on the rise in the U.S. because of poor leadership and the lack of a nationally coordinated response, Ms. Donovan said. And some of what she says about COVID being on the rise is true, but I don't think any of these conspiracists allege that COVID is on the rise because, well, that might not be true. I don't know all of the content that these folks have put out and what they've said about the Great Reset. I'm going to approach it from a totally different. I mean, I think COVID is the cover, but the reasons why the reset is going down are energy based and economic. And there's a little bit here. I don't know if it was the author or editors or who, but somebody reached out to Twitter to complain about this not violating their community standards. You know, lots of censors out there these days coming from the media. So that was the New York Times on, what did I say? That was 11/19. Here was the New York Times of this year on April 10th, also of this year. After the pandemic, the big reset. Perhaps it's the one word that matters. They used big back in April, not great. So this is totally not a far right. When the New York Times does it, it's not a far right conspiracy. But when anybody else, or if anyone who does happen to have right-leaning politics and is a commentator, then it's a far right, extremist conspiracy like QAnon or some of the more wild stuff out there. This is unbelievable. Some of the greatest advances in American history were birthed by disaster. So explain to me, Timothy Egan, by the way, he's an op-ed writer, has been for about 18 years for the New York Times. He's written some books. And don't at me about this being an op-ed. There are still editorial boards. And that last piece showed, the framing was dripping, that they were looking to get you to basically discredit anyone or reject the idea of the big reset being something that should be on your mind, and also reject anyone who says it is. And thirdly, just, trust your overlords. They'll take care of everything. But here's how this piece opened 7 months ago. Every crisis opens a course to the unknown. In an eye blink, the impossible becomes possible. History in a sprint can mean a dark, lasting turn for the worst or a new day of enlightened public policy. Be still my heart, but I see the latter. Some of the greatest advances in American history: liberation of slaves, Social Security, robust clean air and water mandates. Liberation of slaves, I'll give you that. Social Security, I won't give you that. And robust clean air and water mandates as some of the greatest advances in American history. Have you ever heard of Flint, Michigan? That wasn't that long ago. Anyway, these things were all birthed by disaster. For now, the coronavirus pandemic is an epic of sorrow and has many mortal months still to run. But in the midst of our suffering, our grief for loved ones lost, our loneliness and social isolation, we have a chance to re-engineer our world. Look at the last bit of that sentence. Timothy Egan in April in the New York Times in an op-ed, fair enough, but remember what the last piece said. It's a far-right conspiracy. He's saying that the pandemic is giving us an opportunity to re-engineer our world. When you re-engineer something, I think it's pretty safe to say that you make a major change to it. I don't re-engineer my pencil when I sharpen it in a pencil sharpener, but if I were to take my pencil apart and somehow turn it into a pen, that would be a pretty ambitious and dramatic re-engineering. This is the exact thing that I am, the work that I've done in terms of the Great Reset. This is what they're telling you. And more importantly, what the last piece failed to mention is, at least for my purposes, I have only pulled information from the World Economic Foundation, Klaus Schwab, who is the executive director of the World Economic Foundation, and folks from their website or agencies that have partnered. They have basically the entire S&P 500 plus multinational companies, all as partner companies, and they have the UN and they and other think tanks and kind of supranational agencies, and they host panels about, hey, how are we going to tinker with things and change things? And isn't COVID-19 providing us a great opportunity to do that quickly? I don't have the rest of Timothy's article here because we're going to cover what he talked about. But I just found this to be such a ridiculously obvious example of how how you have to treat information from mainstream sources. Because more often than not, the information they're giving you, not that it's fake or outright lies. In this case, it's a large stretch of, very large stretch of the truth. But it's not outright lies, so it's not fake news that we have a problem with. That's fake news is pretty easy to handle. You can prove it's fake. We have fiat news where it doesn't necessarily exist to inform you from a neutral standpoint. It exists to shape your opinion about something in a specific direction, and it acts as opinion that is disguised as analysis. So it looks like, oh, I'm being analytical, but really they're just giving you a load of crap. To kind of continue on with this theme of how much we're being gaslit, especially this year. This is some COVID-19 edition. As I was putting this deck together on Canva. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is, oops. Oh crap. I gave away the punchline to a joke. Now, this is another interesting example. This comes from US Right to Know, and this is a media outlet that's small, which I tend to like, because if you're big, you probably serve some ends that I might think jeopardize your integrity. But in any event, what they do is they file Freedom of Information Act lawsuits to obtain public record, or to obtain private records and share them with the public about issues concerning, of public interest. And this is huge. A nonprofit named Eco Health Alliance orchestrated key scientists' statement on natural origin of SARS-CoV-2. These folks sued Eco Health Alliance and got their emails. Let's take a look. Emails obtained by US Right to Know show that a statement in The Lancet, quick break, The Lancet is a very, very prominent medical journal. Serious stuff only hits The Lancet, right? That you would expect to be rigorous. Authored by 27 public health scientists condemning, quote, conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin, was organized by employees of Eco Health Alliance, a nonprofit group that has received millions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer funding to genetically manipulate coronaviruses with scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Okay, another great use of the terminology here, conspiracy theories. If you're starting to pick up, you should be able to see this. It is a phrase that is used to elicit a very specific response. Oh, okay. They're conspiracy theorists, meaning they are not. It's meant to discredit, right? It's a pejorative more than it is a description of someone who has a theory about a conspiracy. It is packed with signal to the reader saying, here's what you need to think about the folks that are conspiracy theorists or that have this conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory about COVID-19 not having natural origins is actually proving to be closer to reality. The overwhelming evidence that we have is that it is the result of gain of function research that's been around for almost 50 years. And I made a joke back in like March about, this is China's way to kind of force a devalue of the dollar as you release this awful pandemic on the world. I don't know that China released anything. I would say we'll maybe never know that, or not in my lifetime, or I'll be an old man by the time something like that hits the tape. But let's assume that it was just an accident. Someone, it got into somebody that worked in the lab and they got out and they brought it with them. It is concerning to me that folks like Dr. Fauci and other highly regarded public health officials have been funding research, gain of function research, for no other reason. I mean, they say it's to study and to be more prepared for the next pandemic or epidemic. Well, you weren't prepared for this one. So if you've been doing this you've been spending millions of dollars doing all this work for years about how we got to be ready to handle this. How are you caught so flat-footed? Are you incompetent? Or is there something, what else explains that? Let's continue with the piece. The emails obtained via public records requests show that EcoHealth Alliance President Peter Daszak drafted the Lancet statement. Wow. And that he intended it to not be identifiable as coming from any one organization or person, but rather to be seen as simply a letter from leading scientists. Daszak wrote that he wanted to avoid the appearance of a political statement. So here you have a gentleman who works for EcoHealth Alliance and does the very thing that he wants public perception to miss. He doesn't want it to be identified as this one cat drafts this letter and then gets gets 27 public health scientists to sign on to it and say, hey, yeah, stop with the crazy kooky theories, guys. Come on. Take off the tinfoil hat, you wonks. Which, is no, excuse me, is no skin off my back. I don't care what most of these sociopaths have to say. They're not fooling me, but this kind of stuff fools a lot of people. And now we're seeing it being ripped out into the open. I'm sure you didn't catch this in the news. I had to go find this via my ways, but this is remarkable. Remarkable. Daszak drafted a statement to cast shade on the idea that COVID-19 did not have a natural origin, and these were honestly scientific inquiries. People were like, well, how did it go from a bat to a penguin to a human? Bats and penguins don't have any natural setting in the known world where they would interact, and their environments and climes are totally different. And humans, I mean, I had never heard of a penguin. How did this happen? Okay, it's natural. We'll give you that. Zoonotic or whatever the term is, but walk me through your logic. And if the logic and the story seems like, man, that doesn't quite add up, but, a wet market in Wuhan where somebody ate a bat, but, a mile away, there's this level 4 biohazard virology lab. Like, you gotta be kidding me. Occam's razor, which is an imperfectly used kind of intellectual tool, but the preponderance of like likelihood is not that it came from a wet market because somebody ate a bat, but because it was an accident in a lab, probably doing stuff we shouldn't have been doing in the first place. The 27 authors strongly condemns conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin and reported that scientists from multiple countries, quote, overwhelmingly conclude that this coronavirus originated in wildlife. That is changing. That is changing for a later show. The evidence is big. The letter included no scientific references to refute a lab origin theory of the virus. One scientist, Linda Safe, asked via email whether it would be useful, quote, to add just one or two statements in support of why COVID is not a lab-generated virus and is naturally occurring. Seems critical to scientifically refute such claims. So we have here one scientist like, hey, shouldn't we even put up, shouldn't we show a little bit of effort that we're being scientific in our refuting of these ideas? And Peter was like, nah, just sign on to what I told you to say. Just sign the damn letter. Let's go to an email. I did pull one of the emails. I read some of them. So this was in the Lancet. This was the actual statement. Let's read that really quickly. The rapid, open, and transparent sharing of data on this outbreak is now being threatened by rumors and misinformation around its origins. We stand together to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin. Scientists from multiple countries have published and analyzed genomes of the causative agent, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, or the virus, and they overwhelmingly conclude that this coronavirus originated in wildlife. Look at all the citations. They're just like love bombing you with, oh, look how much research there is. I know you're not going to read any of this stuff. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 9 sites that, hey, look at this body of knowledge we have, to show that it's coming from wildlife. One What's more important is not the knowledge they have about. They don't really have any proof that it came from wildlife, but the proof that they are using, or the proof, it's a loose concept in this day and age. But they're saying we weren't able to use all of our super sophisticated modeling software and programs to replicate the entire genome from a computer model, and that is not the only way to create a virus, as gain of function research is showing us all in real time. But here's the letter from Peter Daszak that I thought was interesting. Just the opening here, or the opening of this paragraph, the first sentence. I hope you're willing to sign on to this. Your voice will be very influential, particularly in keeping these critical bridges open between the U.S. and China. So I don't know Peter Daszak's role as president of this nonprofit. Nonprofits are often used for reasons other than virtue. But clearly there's some political, maybe business-related interests at not further fraying the relationship between the U.S. and China. And remember, the timeline of this, China kind of sandbagged the West through the WHO and the CDC. I think the evidence is pretty clear for that. That this wasn't that big of a deal. It's just the flu. They weren't open and transparent and sharing data as quickly as it came out. We had doctors that were getting censored on the internet in China saying, "This, watch out, they're not being truthful," and they were all censored and disappeared. And then the joke. So as I was putting this deck together, Canva, the website I use for the presentation, there's no affiliation or sponsorship at all, but this popped up as I was talking shit about some of these reputable sources and the lack of integrity in their work. In light of the coronavirus outbreak, we recommend checking the World Health Organization's website for the most accurate and up-to-date information. They came out of the gate by being inaccurate and not up to date, so I will pass on that, but thanks for the reminder that I did not ask for. So I hope those examples rang a bell, even if it's a little one. Even if it's the opposite bell that I was trying to ring. The bell that I was trying to ring is just to show you how the process of like propaganda and misinformation works in places and avenues you don't expect to see that. The New York Times is the paper of record, right? You would not expect to see such a poorly founded piece about what the Great Reset is. Especially after the same newspaper, hosted an opinion basically saying what I'm going to say to you tonight. Let's do a quick time check because I just do not know where I am on time. All right, we're doing not too bad. I'll take 40 minutes. We're almost done here, folks. I appreciate y'all hanging in. And look, I mean for this stuff to be valuable. I put lots of time into this. So you will get something out of it, and to show you that I'm not just one of these far-right extremist conspiracy theorists just looking for civil war and the bug to go down. Like I that could not be further from the truth. Like I might joke about that stuff, but I like to have a laugh every now and then. So let's keep with the theme here. My thesis about what the Great Reset is really basic, and I think a reset is needed in a lot of respects. And the reason it's needed is because our economic growth model is totally broken. I mean, completely broken. We have a growth model that's based on something that doesn't exist. The second piece of this is it follows naturally. If the world's economic growth model is broken and some 35-year-old know-nothing hillbilly on his homestead in Ohio is starting to ask questions, well, guess what? I'll bet the world's thought leaders and political leaders, governments, supranational agencies, industry leaders, I'm sure they know this. I'm absolutely sure. And I'm also sure that they have a plan. Because if you glean an insight about what the future is likely to hold, a smart person with the means and the resources is going to start building a plan for how they can either take advantage of that or not get knocked off track by it, or whatever the case is. You're building plans is what you do with information that you get about your world That's what humans do. These folks definitely have a plan. I understand the need for some of it. Now, the big issue that I have here is I happen to value highly a lot of the tenets that this country was at least founded upon. And if it wasn't practiced in the founding, I think the ideals are worth chasing. We've never really been the city on the hill, but I don't think that's a good reason to not try to be. And to do that, I think you have to focus on, in every way possible, treating other humans as ends of and to themselves, and not as instruments or means to other folks' ends. It gets really utilitarian and really dark really quickly. So what is this plan they have? That is the big thing here. What are they up to? And what's your plan? So if they have a plan, you should have a plan, right? We did this thing in the military, in the Marines. It was called turning the map around. I'm sure I've mentioned it to some of you. And it's a exercise to practice thinking from the enemy's perspective. So if you've been tasked with some kind of a mission in this environment, you've got a map. So, oh, here's how I'm going to maneuver this squad and that platoon, and we're going to set up our base of fire here. And blah, blah, blah. Well, that's all well and great, but guess what? There's another team on the field. And that team is going to look for any weakness in your plan or in the execution of it to pop you in the mouth and knock you off guard. So turn the map around. If you were going to be put in charge of stopping what your mission is, how would you do it? And what that does is it gives you really great, it opens a channel into the thinking of folks that might not explicitly be on your side. Now, I'm not saying all these folks that are involved in the Great Reset are eating babies in the woods while they worship the devil. That not at all. Nothing could be further from what I think. But it doesn't mean they're on your side. They can be varying degrees of neutral or varying degrees of not neutral. So let's not get caught up in getting too, energized by the idea that folks that you haven't elected and probably don't know have a plan for how your life might look that you might not like. So what's broken? The world's economic growth model is totally broken, and the reason it is this function. This is a parabolic function. It will go to infinity, or very, very, yeah. I mean, it goes. It's an infinite function, and basically what it is the exponent here, 0.0292. That is 2.92% GDP growth every year, compounded forever. That is how our financial system, it operates on this assumption. That's why we have the debt problems that we have, is because we keep thinking that we just need to get more money out there to stimulate things, and we'll get back onto this curve because we broke off of it 12 years ago. We've been nowhere near, we have not been near the original trend. Now, you can't quite see it in this because this is not an actual model of growth. The black line is the function. I think the blue dots are the economic growth, but there has been a gap that's formed there post 08. But the idea that you need to get your head around here is that we cannot continue to believe and base our decisions on we're just going to grow for 3% forever. It's not going to happen. And in fact, Robert Gordon, who's an economist out of Chicago, University of Chicago, wrote an excellent book called The Rise and Fall of American Growth. And we basically stopped growing from a technological perspective 50 years ago, if you look at total factor productivity. More and more of the money that we invest, it goes into entertainment, communications, and data collection and processing. And those don't add a lot of value. They don't distribute value and wealth creation evenly across the population. They actually, it becomes very, very focused, especially with other forces at bay, or in play. Let's get the words right here. All right. So what's wrong with having an infinite growth assumption? Why can't we just grow forever? Well, because we have a finite planet. The stuff that we use to pay for our growth in a non-monetary way, like energy, and labor is fixed. We only have so much of it. On the labor side, you can automate things. You can get efficiencies and more productivity growth with tech. That has its own suite and domain of problems. But in terms of oil, nothing is more important than oil right now, even, and it will continue to be very important. The renewables push is good. The problem with renewables is it's mostly been like a smash and grab game by a lot of smart people and nice suits that have really white teeth and give great PowerPoint presentations, probably much better than this one. But these folks are more raccoons than they are innovators or leaders of the technological revolution when it comes to energy. Oil is it, folks. And look at this graph. This is global oil production, crude oil production since 1925, and I only was able to get data to 2005. And this comes from Our Finite World, Gail Teverberg, who is an energy analyst, very, very interesting individual with some really, I think she's really close to being right on here. But the blue is total historical production of crude. The green is all giants, so all giant fields. And then the red is the top 20 giant fields. So it used to be that your giants mattered so much. That's where you got a lot of your production growth from. And here's a different chart. This is consumption measured. The y-axis here is exajoules, and then obviously over time. So I did mention renewables, and you're starting to see that ramp from the mid-aughts, and that does look like it's the beginning of a parabolic curve, and that's great. Y equals x squared is good stuff. We like that when it comes to things that make the earth a more habitable place and maybe reduces other problems. But here's the issue. You've got, that's almost 200 exajoules of oil consumption, 150 exajoules over of coal, almost the same amount for nat gas. Nuclear is not even on the map. Renewables just eclipsed nuclear within the last few years, it looks like. And hydro, there's limited growth opportunities. We know where the world's water is. It's going to take probably, I think, conservatively 30 years to, if you held consumption steady, if you want to consume energy the way you do today, but you want it to all be from renewables, good luck. Maybe 30 years. And that transition is going to be incredibly important. There's going to be a lot of change during that transition. This also comes from Our Finite World at Gail Teverberg there. So what you're seeing here too generally is that, look, energy consumption is growing as we're running into a problem with getting our oil. And back to crude here. So these are discovery trends for giant fields. And the blue is the volume discovered of the fields, and the red is the number of fields discovered. And what you'll see is since about the end of Vietnam, or right before the end of Vietnam, we peaked in terms of in terms of discovery. We peaked over 50 years ago. And look now, we just do not find those giant fields like we used to, and when we do, there's less in them. And why that's a problem is because energy gets increasingly more expensive, both from a monetary, like a money perspective, like a capital perspective, and from an energy perspective in terms of the energy you got to put in to get it out of the ground once you get past kind of the peak of production in any given oil field or well. So, sorry, my daughter is going ballistic in the other room. I'm not sure what the issue is. But we're not going to discover our oil again in a way that makes energy cheap and abundant. It's not going to happen, and we're consuming too much as it is now. And this actually puts the United States in a really interesting problem. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about shale gas and shale oil and the boom we've had in shale these past few years. Well, that boom has been predicated on debt financing at very low rates, and it hasn't happened. Production has gone up, but part of the problem with the production that we've increased is it is too light a hydrocarbon to use for mixing of other fuels. We use a lot of diesel in the United States. We still have to import heavier crude to make our diesel and other fuels and other plastics on down the value chain that come from oil. And oil has an enormous value chain. Your modern life would look incredibly different without oil, and I don't just mean transportation. So clearly we have some problems. We are consuming more resources, or we're consuming a fixed number of resources at an accelerating pace, and have been for a long time. And that's going to reverse, whether we like it or not. Another thing that's broken, and we've talked about this a lot, is the political social dynamic here in the United States. This is that work from the Pew Research Center showing kind of the median Republican overlaid the median Democrat, and you saw an almost normal bell curve here back in 1994. Even 2004, maybe it was slightly more Republican, and actually the gap narrowed. It's still big purple area where there's lots of blue and red overlap, but 2017 was the break, or 16 was the break, and 2017 shows that not only did it break, but looks like the left has grown in terms of folks that find themselves being consistently liberal, and conservatives have spread out and have a wider. That's a weird chart. In any event, what's not growing or even remaining steady is this purple area, and this purple area was what you used to. That's all you needed if you were a candidate, was you spend your primary going left or right if you're a Republican, and then when the general rolls around, whoop, right in the middle. That's how you win a general election as a presidential candidate in the United States up until 2016. Now you're almost guaranteed a loss. Almost. I say almost because it looks like Joe Biden won. And I think he is perceived as a moderate status quo cat. I don't think he's going to staff his cabinet and put make his appointments as a moderate status quo kind of guy. But this is highlighting a problem where it's basically like increasingly more and more of the country do not want to live with their political opponents. They want to live in a different governmental framework. I mean, the gulf here is growing larger. I'm sure it's even bigger. Another problem is from a prosperity standpoint, an economic prosperity standpoint. This is a chart of money supply, and I'm not even going to talk about inflation. I think that's really, really misunderstood. But this is basically a bunch of checking accounts and cash, and the world's a broad measure of the U.S.'s money supply. And then back in, what was that, like 82, we had about $889 billion in those accounts. We now have like 22 trillion, like 21.5 trillion. Looks like there was a big jump from all those transfer payments at the beginning of the year. I don't know what that's attributed to, but the point here is that money supply has grown 20-fold, more than 20-fold, right? More than 20-fold. That's a big increase when you consider that real median household income in the United States since the same period has gone up about 20% from $52,000 a year, and this is adjusted for inflation, real. So CPI is backed out of this. But we're at 68,000 as of, looks like, the end of 18, beginning of 19. So yeah, a 20% bump in median income when broad money in the U.S. has grown by a factor of over 20. This is just another way of looking at kind of inequality. Clearly the middle class and the lower classes in the United States have been getting the short end of the stick from an economic perspective for a long time. And we do see, there's a nice tailwind. Looks like median wages may be going up. I don't know how long that wage pressure will last. If we do get the fiscal spending out of Congress, then yeah, we could actually see real wages for a while, maybe a couple of years or something, go up. It depends on how stable things are politically. So this I meant to use the opening of this conversation about the Great Reset to show you here are the problems that exist, that the world's leaders see and they know. And not only do they know these problems exist, but they're seeing increasing social unrest and lack of trust in the institutions and the folks put in charge either by election or other means to solve some of these problems. The faith is wearing very thin. And I think this concerns them. I think it concerns them greatly. So I do have a video clip here see if we can get this thing going. This is from the World Economic Forum, and it's titled The Great Reset. But remember, if I talk about folks' plans for a Great Reset, I am a right-wing conspiracy theorist. Let's watch it. Whoops, did I screw it up? No, we're gonna, I went to the wrong. Lots of public unrest. I was talking about overcrowding, all this awful stuff. Our systems need a reset. And this is all that awful stuff, kind of going backwards, undoing it all. Hey, you have a role. I have a role. You all have a role. No one left behind. Learn how to live with the world again. That's the messaging here. And like I said, it's not lost on me. It's really not. It's not like I just want to keep destroying the planet that we're all stewards of. You know, I am, and I know that we can't continue to assume that we're going to grow forever. That's why we are doing what we're doing out here. I think I've been pretty clear about that with a lot of you. But what I am concerned about is how. The how. And there's two reasons. One is this is like threading. I mean, this to get this done right is the Hail Mary of Hail Marys. This is such an ambitious political project. And it reduces, I fear that it could reduce people to instruments, a means to an end. You know, you all have a part. I'll say we're all gonna be doing something for some goal, some greater good or whatever. What is it and how? And will I get to have any say in how this unfolds? What if I don't want to? What if I have my own plan? Or a group of us have some plans that are different? You know, just there's lots of slick marketing around this. And I'm reading Klaus Schwab's book right now. I'm almost done. He uses lots of fancy words and catchphrasing and all kinds of stuff to I think really wow you. And there's another video that I'll show in the next talk, which I'll do next week. We're going to talk about the plans specifically, what the Sustainable Development Goals are, which agencies are proposing what, and they've been explicit about, hey, Western values are going to be tested to the breaking point. I think that means Western values are going to break, and I think that means, you know, Western values, i.e., things like liberty. An agency at the individual level. There's a big push against individualism. Oh, what's wrong with the United States, especially as COVID is showing us, is everyone's too much of an individual. There's no collective body there. I disagree. I think that the individual is the most important minority there is. We're always talking about, oh, well, you know, we need to level the playing field for certain underprivileged groups or folks that have suffered because of whether it's slavery or stupid policies or racism or whatever the case is. There's hey, we need to elevate minorities. Well, what is the ultimate minority? It's the person, right? And what are they going to be willing to subject me to push this reset button? I don't know that it is something that I will be on board with. And I want to make sure that I understand the rules of the game here before I agree to play it. And that's what we're going to do in the next video. So I appreciate you spending an hour with me or whatever it's been. I really appreciate your time. I will be back again next week, and I'll do a video and get it out early next week. It does take me some time to edit it and get all the sound and video, figured out. But I'm really excited to bring this stuff to you guys. If you have questions, if you want to throw me a link or send me an article, you can do it on Facebook. You can do it on Twitter @gunsandmoney. So hit me up there if you want to share something. If you have questions, send me an email. If you want to be more long form and formal about it, NOWS November Oscar Whiskey Sierra Research @gmail.com. I will definitely be incredibly appreciative of all that stuff and respond to it and bring it into the conversation here. So again, thanks for your time. I hope everyone has an awesome Thanksgiving, however you spend it. Be well, be healthy, and we'll see you in a week.